Asheville, North Carolina, July 2009. It was the kind of day Rachel Sanderson believed nothing bad could possibly touch. The sky stretched a deep, endless blue sunlight, spilling gold across the rolling hills, and the Pisgah Forest buzzed with the hum of cicadas, carrying the faint scent of pine sap and damp earth. The Sanderson family had woken early, loading their silver SUV with picnic supplies, the girls so excited they could hardly stay seated. Abigail 7 had pulled her own ponytail crooked and spent the ride counting license plates and fiddling with an old lottery ticket Thomas had left on the seat. Lily, just 4, clutched her tattered stuffed rabbit wide-eyed singing, tunelessly, along to the car radio. Her parents' cabin waited at the forest's edge, where a wide meadow stretched to a white picket fence shaded by an ancient oak. An old photo hung in the cabin's living room, already faded, showing this very meadow 2 decades ago, the family smiling in the same summer sun. Rachel spread the checkered picnic blanket, setting out paper plates beside a pitcher of lemonade and a box of fried chicken. Abigail busied herself sticking tiny toothpick flags into cookies, while Lily galloped her stuffed rabbit around the grass like a horse. Sitting at the edge of the blanket, watching her girls, Rachel thought to herself, "Tomorrow will never be better than today. Go ahead and play." Thomas set his voice, even as he hoisted the cooler toward the car. Rachel stood tugging her sundress straight, gathering a few stray napkins that had blown loose. It was just 10 minutes. Exactly 10 minutes. When they returned, the blanket lay there damp with spilled lemonade. The cookies scattered the stuffed rabbit face down in the dirt. There were no giggles, no tiny feet pounding across the grass. No Abigail. No Lily. At first Rachel called their names, her voice still calm. Then louder. Sharper. "Abby, Lily. Come back right now." No answer. Her calls became screams, her screams cracked and hoarse, echoing through the pines, swallowed by the steady, indifferent hum of cicadas. That afternoon, red and blue lights flashed through the trees. K-9 units barked, a helicopter thundered overhead. Hundreds of searchers combed through underbrush and riverbanks. But when night fell, the lights dimmed, the helicopter pulled away, and the volunteers slipped off into the dark Pisgah. Forest returned to its ancient silence, as though no one had vanished, as though no tragedy had ever taken place. And that night, for the first time, Rachel woke in the middle of her nightmare, swearing she heard her daughter's voices somewhere in her mind. "Mommy. Mommy. We're here." 11 years had passed since that horrifying afternoon, but for Rachel Sanderson the memory had never left her. It lingered vivid in every detail, the damp sweat at the back of her neck, the endless hum of cicadas as her daughters vanished from the meadow, as though the earth had simply swallowed them. The search back then had ended the way most tragedies do, with nothing. Whispers spread maybe wild animals had taken them, maybe a stranger had grabbed them, turning them into yet another pair of faded faces on missing children posters. People moved on with their lives. Rachel never could. She and Thomas relocated to Charlotte, trying to live quietly in a small apartment. Thomas buried himself in work, avoiding mention of the past, but Rachel didn't. Every year on Abigail's or Lily's birthday, she emailed the Buncombe County Sheriff. Every year she printed new flyers, posted to forums, taped them to telephone poles, a kind of fragile prayer. Then, 2 weeks before what would have been Lily's 15th birthday, the phone rang. It was a quiet spring morning, the sun still weak, the kitchen cold, and still. Rachel was pouring coffee, her eyes idly tracing a red circle on the calendar, the 21st Lily's birthday. When the screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, she almost didn't answer, but something deep inside told her to. She picked up. The man's voice was low, hoarse, deliberate. "Mrs. Sanderson. This is Neil Harrison with Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. We found something that may relate to your daughter's case. I need you and your husband to come to Asheville today." The coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile. As their SUV wound its way out of Charlotte and through the twisting mountain roads back toward Asheville, the sky above hung leaden heavy with gray. Neither of them spoke. Thomas kept his hands tight on the wheel eyes locked ahead, as though the painted lines of the road were the only thing keeping him steady. Rachel sat silent, fingers clenching the inside of her jacket pocket, where she'd tucked the last photo of Lily, her hair messy, her smile carefree. At the sheriff's office, they were ushered into a small conference room, its harsh fluorescent lights casting everything in a sterile chill. On the table sat a clear evidence bag. Inside was a dented, mud-streaked stainless steel thermos, its butterfly stickers peeling and scarred. Rachel only needed a glance to know. It was Abigail's. Her body stiffened, her hand trembling as it gripped the edge of the table. Harrison's voice came slow and heavy. A man metal detecting in Pisgah found this under an old oak. Nearby, we recovered the remains of a young girl in a green gingham dress. We've matched the dental records. It's Abigail. There was no scream. Rachel simply folded forward her shoulders, shaking violently, hot tears falling in silence. Thomas sat frozen, his face white eyes hollow, but his trembling hand still reached for hers. Harrison's voice lowered, and the next word sparked something faint but fierce in the ashes. We found no trace of Lily at the site. That doesn't mean she's dead. Rachel lifted her head, eyes red and wet, but with something fierce and unyielding flickering there now. She knew in that instant this was no longer the time to cry. This was the time to find the truth. Rachel returned to Pisgah Forest the next morning. The dirt road leading to the old meadow felt narrower now, the overgrown brush swallowing what little sunlight managed to filter through. She walked slowly, breathing in that familiar scent, rotting wood pine sap, damp earth. 11 years had passed, yet the forest remained unchanged. Only she was different, thinner, harder, her eyes sharp with resolve. The clearing appeared at the base of the hill, empty and quiet. There was no checkered blanket, no basket of biscuits, no laughter echoing among the trees, just dull gray evidence tape marking the place where Abigail's thermos and her small broken body had been found. Rachel knelt, her fingers brushing the rough bark of the old oak. She closed her eyes, imagining Abigail leaning against it, sipping from her thermos, showing Lily how to weave grass into little dolls. The image hovered in her mind, then slipped away, leaving behind a hollow chill. The new search team had set up a makeshift command post in the clearing. Maps were spread over tables, grids drawn across the dense forest. Volunteers and investigators from Charlotte and locals alike gathered around the tables, murmuring quietly. Rachel scanned the unfamiliar faces until one stopped her cold. David. Her brother stood at the edge of the group, hands buried in his jacket pockets, head slightly bowed. He was gaunt now, his beard unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. When he noticed her staring, he looked up surprised, then offered a faint, crooked smile. "Sis," he said softly, stepping toward her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I couldn't stay away." His embrace was cold, stiff. Something in it felt wrong. That day, the search parties split into smaller groups. Rachel was assigned to David's team with 2 other volunteers. They headed north into the steeper, thicker woods. David walked ahead, leading them, but every time they reached a certain narrow path, he would hesitate, then veer sharply in another direction. Rachel quickened her pace to catch up, keeping her voice even. "Why aren't we covering that area? It's marked on the grid." David gave a humorless chuckle, eyes still forward. "Snakes. That part's crawling with them. You don't want to deal with that." Rachel stayed quiet, but her eyes flicked to the map. The area David avoided was the same one where fresh mud had once been found, and where searchers years ago had recovered a single old hair clip. Lily's. That evening, back at the hotel, Rachel couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring into the darkness, the image of David pouring over the map, replaying in her mind the way he'd avoided her eyes. Finally, she opened her laptop and typed in the address of their parents' old inheritance deed. A few clicks, and there it was, the northern edge of Pisgah, the land David had inherited, and right below that a note about the small cabin on the property, listed as abandoned, at least on paper. But Rachel knew the gleaming new lock on that door couldn't lie. That night, Rachel decided she couldn't wait any longer. She slipped quietly out of the hotel, the chill of the mountain wind stinging her cheeks, the sky smothered in dark clouds, the moon no more than a faint smear of light behind the trees. The road north into Pisgah Forest was pitch black, her tires crunching over gravel, the wind whistling through the canopy. The cabin loomed ahead, faint in her headlights, the roof dark with moss, the steps slick with green growth, but the padlock on the front door gleamed polished and new. Rachel killed the engine and sat for a moment feeling her pulse hammer in her chest. Her fingers tightened around the bolt cutters hidden in her coat. She rolled the window down, breathed in the earthy damp of the forest night, and stepped out. The porch swing creaked faintly in the wind as she climbed the steps. She pulled the cutters from her pocket, clamped them over the lock, and squeezed. The metal snapped with a sharp crack echoing through the trees, then all fell silent again. The door groaned open, hinges dry and stiff. A thick smell of dust and something faintly human hung in the darkness. Rachel switched on her flashlight. The beam swept across the empty room, old furniture, warped wood, but there, cutting through the dust, were fresh, muddy tracks leading to a rug in the corner. She crouched, peeled the rug back. A steel trapdoor handle glinted in the light. Her hand trembled as she gripped it, but she pulled anyway. The heavy hatch lifted a rush of cold, stale air rising to meet her. The narrow wooden stairs stretched down into blackness. Rachel descended one step at a time, each creak of the wood louder than the last. At the bottom, her flashlight beam caught on a pale pink door covered in butterfly stickers, hearts and scrawled childish letters, Clara's room. Her breath came quick now, her heart pounding. She pushed the door. A washed-out ceiling light flickered on, spilling over a small pink-painted room. A little bed with a faded floral quilt, a plastic dresser stuffed with dolls, a bookshelf cluttered with coloring books, and at a messy little desk sat a thin brown-haired girl, her head bowed, scribbling a drawing. Rachel froze. The girl looked up. Her dark, hollow eyes stared at Rachel, confused, frightened, unrecognizing. Lily. Rachel's voice cracked as she reached out, but the girl shrank back against the wall, clutching her battered stuffed rabbit. Her lips quivering, "Daddy. Daddy. There's a stranger." Heavy footsteps creaked on the stairs behind her. Rachel spun around. David stood there, his eyes like ice, his mouth twisted into a crooked grin. A pistol glinted faintly in his hand as his voice dropped to a cold growl. "You shouldn't have come here." Rachel swallowed hard, stepping fully in front of her daughter, her gaze burning no matter what. "I'm taking my daughter home." The little basement reeked of cold metal and damp dust, the dim white light overhead, casting harsh shadows on all three of them. Rachel stood squarely in front of Lily, her eyes locked on David as he descended the stairs, one slow, deliberate step at a time. The wooden planks creaked under his weight, blending with Rachel's own frantic breath. "You don't understand," David murmured, the pistol glinting faintly in his hand, his gaze icy. "She's happy here. She doesn't need you anymore." Rachel swallowed hard, refusing to back down, her voice rough but steady. "That's not happiness. She's my daughter. You're not keeping her another day." David let out a hollow laugh, the warped grin of a madman. "You really think she remembers you? Look at her. She calls me Daddy. She loves me. You're just a stranger here to ruin my family." Behind Rachel, Lily trembled, clutching her tattered rabbit tight, her wide eyes filled with fear. "Daddy. Don't let her," Take me." The words sliced through Rachel's chest like a blade, but she didn't move. Her hand tightened on the flashlight, her eyes blazing. David raised the gun, fully leveling it at her. "Go. Before you regret it." But Rachel didn't go. She took one deep breath, and in the instant he glanced toward Lily, she lunged, grabbing his wrist. The gun went off the crack, deafening in the small room, the bullet slamming into the wall as gunpowder smoke filled the air. They grappled Lily, screaming behind them, chaos filling the basement. Rachel held on with everything she had, shouting at the top of her lungs. "Help me! Someone's here! Help!" Heavy boots pounded on the floor above. Beams of light stabbed down the stairwell and voices roared. "Police, drop the weapon." David wrenched himself hard, but officers swarmed him, pinning him face down. His hands forced behind his back into cuffs. Even as they dragged him away, he screamed, wild and desperate. "Clara, I love you. I'll come back, I promise." Rachel collapsed beside Lily, pulling her close, whispering through tears. "No. No, baby. I'm here. I'll never leave you." Lily whimpered daddy, but her tiny hand finally weakly settled over her mother's. And Rachel knew the long night was nearly over. The little basement was now quiet, except for the lingering smell of gunpowder and the crackle of police radios echoing from the stairs. Officers hauled David up step by step, his head twisting back, his eyes locked on Lily, screaming hoarsely, his voice breaking. "Clara, I love you. I'll come back. I promise." Rachel pulled Lily closer, covering her small ears against those twisted words. But Lily's eyes still followed him, bewildered, pained, like someone being ripped from the only anchor she knew. When the ambulance arrived, Lily was gently wrapped in a thin blanket and laid on the stretcher. Rachel stayed close, gripping her daughter's tiny, trembling hand, feeling it cold and limp, as though it could slip away at any moment. But she forced a smile and whispered softly into her ear, "It's okay now, baby. Mommy's here." Buncombe County Hospital was eerily quiet in the late night. The harsh fluorescent lights on the ceiling felt colder than ever. Lily lay on the bed, her brown hair a tangled mess, bruises dark on her wrists, her eyes blank, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes she flinched, mumbling under her breath, "Daddy." Each time Rachel heard it, it cut deeper into her chest, like a blade. But she never left. She sat there stroking her daughter's soft hair, whispering, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Not ever." Downstairs, David was loaded into a prison van. His hands cuffed his head down. Flashbulbs popped, reporters shouted questions, but he gave no answers. Yet as the van door slammed, his eyes lifted one last time toward the hospital, still holding that warped, possessive love for Lily. On the day of the trial, Rachel was there. She stood still holding Lily's hand as the charges were read aloud, each word striking like a hammer. David never looked at his sister, never showed remorse, but every time his gaze swept over Lily, there was still that sick, painful glimmer. This time, Rachel didn't look away. She stared straight back, her eyes cold and final, cutting the last thread that tied him to her daughter. That night, back at the hospital, Rachel sat quietly by Lily's bed, holding her fragile hand. And this time, Lily's fingers weakly, but deliberately, tightened around hers. It was faint, loose, but to Rachel it was a promise someday her daughter would come back. She leaned close, her voice breaking as she whispered, "No matter how long it takes, I'll wait for you." The weeks that followed moved unbearably slow, as though each hour carried its own weight. Asheville remained serene, the dark green hills of Pisgah still stretched far and quiet, but to Rachel it would forever be a scar on the map. Lily was transferred to the children's psychiatric unit. The doctors told Rachel her daughter's trauma ran deeper than anyone could see. 11 years of darkness, brainwashing memories warped beyond recognition. They couldn't be undone in days or even months. In therapy sessions, Lily still didn't call Rachel Mom. Sometimes she would look up and ask, her voice small, "Where's Daddy? Why doesn't he come?" Every time Rachel would just smile, faintly brush her daughter's hair back and say, "Nothing." She learned to be patient. She taught Lily everything again: how to brush her hair, how to hold a spoon, how to write her own name. She told Lily stories from her childhood, the ones she used to love. But Lily's eyes often stayed vacant, sometimes, flashing fearfully, glancing toward the door as though expecting someone else to walk through. David remained in custody, awaiting sentencing. His lawyers begged for leniency, but the jury did not flinch. The press dubbed him the Asheville Monster, his face plastered on headlines for weeks. Rachel didn't read a single word. To her, only Lily mattered now. Some nights Rachel sat in the quiet hospital room, watching her daughter sleep. In her dreams, Lily still murmured, "Daddy," her voice faint and trembling. But her tiny hand still reached out in her sleep, searching for Rachel's, gripping tight, as if terrified to let go. For the first time in 11 years, Rachel closed her eyes and told herself she'll come back, little by little. "I'll wait." Outside, Asheville settled into night, the streetlights casting long shadows over the white fence at the mouth of the road into Pisgah Forest, the place where it had all begun. And Rachel knew the road ahead was long, but she would walk it to the very end. The first morning of fall brought a chill to Asheville, a faint fog clinging to the hospital room window. Rachel sat at Lily's bedside, carefully combing through her hair. Strand by strand, she worked through the tangles until it fell smooth and soft again. Lily sat still, her blank eyes staring out the window. But at least, today she didn't pull away when her mother touched her. The attending doctor passed quietly through the room, leaving a fresh folder on the table: long-term trauma recovery plan, therapy schedule, regular evaluation notes. Rachel picked it up, flipped through page by page, then set it back down and exhaled. Whatever it took, she would sign. At last, the day of David's sentencing came. The federal courtroom was packed with reporters, their flashbulbs popping as Rachel carried Lily through the crowd. The girl burrowed into her mother's shoulder, eyes cast down, tiny fingers gripping Rachel's sleeve instinctively. David was brought in thinner now, his eyes still defiant, warped. When his gaze fell on Lily, he smiled faintly, a smile that sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. The judge read the verdict: life in prison, without parole. A quiet sigh of relief rippled through the room, a few scattered claps. Rachel didn't clap. She didn't smile. She just stood there, looking at David one last time, her eyes hard as stone. David's lips cracked into words, his voice dry but audible. "Clara, I love you. Forever." But this time, Lily pressed her face deeper into her mother's chest and said nothing. Rachel held her daughter tighter, feeling the faint shivers of the small body against her. She didn't look away, didn't blink as David was dragged from the room. When the doors finally closed behind him, Rachel let herself exhale, bending to kiss the top of Lily's head, whispering, "You're not Clara. You're Lily, and you're my daughter." She knew the road ahead would still be long, but at least, today, they had taken the first step. The following month, Rachel rented a small apartment near the hospital so she could care for Lily more easily. It was just 2 rooms overlooking the distant mountains shrouded in morning mist. Each dawn, Rachel opened the window, breathed in the crisp, clean air, and glanced at the faint white fence far off in the hills, a quiet reminder that the tragedy still lingered. Every day, she took Lily to therapy sessions. The specialists worked to draw out her old memories to help her peel away the warped shell David had built around her. But whenever someone said the word "mother," Lily would drop her gaze, confused, silent. Some evenings, Rachel sat at the kitchen table watching Lily awkwardly relearn how to hold a fork, her little hands trembling, glancing up at her as though searching for permission. Rachel only smiled, encouraging her, then gently took her small hand. She was learning patience. At night, Rachel still heard her daughter cry in her sleep, murmuring, "Daddy." Each time, Rachel would rise, sit by her side, take her hand, and whisper, "It's okay. I'm here." One morning, as Rachel was folding clothes into the drawer, she heard a small, halting voice behind her. Mommy." She turned. Lily was standing there, eyes downcast, her fingers clutching at the hem of her shirt, her lips quivering. Rachel stepped forward and gathered her into her arms, her chest tightening. No more words were needed. That alone was enough for her to believe the day her daughter truly came back. Would come. The first winter in Asheville came early, a thin dusting of snow, whitening rooftops, fences, and the distant hills. Rachel took Lily to the park near their apartment, the little girl's hand clutching hers tightly as they walked slowly along the salt-dusted path. Months had passed since the day Rachel found Lily in that pastel-pink basement, and since David was locked away behind bars. Yet Lily's eyes still sometimes drifted, vacant, confused, distant. They stopped at a bench beneath an old oak as children squealed and laughed on the makeshift ice rink nearby. Rachel brushed snow off Lily's shoulders and asked softly, "Are you cold?" Lily shook her head, faintly, lips pressed together. After a moment, she turned back to Rachel, her eyes meeting hers, her voice so small it almost broke apart. "Mommy, I missed you." Rachel felt her heart shatter and mend all at once. She wrapped Lily in her arms, burying her face in her daughter's soft hair, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here. Always." Somewhere in Rachel's mind, the image of that summer meadow, the checkered blanket, the sound of her daughter's laughter returned. But this time, it was no longer a nightmare, just a memory, quiet, reminding her the road had finally been walked to its end. When they stood, Lily's hand stayed in Rachel's, her gaze lifting toward the faint white fence in the distance where the Pisgah Forest still seemed to watch them. Rachel squeezed her hand, took a breath that fogged in the icy air, and stepped forward. She knew the shadows would always be there, and nightmares would still creep in from time to time, but she also knew the light at last had returned, and starting today, they would begin again.